It was the summer of 1989. Las Vegas. The kind of night the desert does best: dry air, neon lights burning against a black sky, and the sound of money moving through every room of every casino on the Strip. Tom Cruise was 26 years old. Fresh off Top Gun. Fresh off The Color of Money. His face was on billboards from New York to Los Angeles. He walked into the Mirage Hotel, brand new, just opened, the most talked about property in Vegas history, and everyone in the lobby knew exactly who he was. But Tom wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about something he'd just seen backstage. He'd gone back to congratulate Sammy Davis Jr. after the show. Sammy had just performed to a packed house, 1,200 people on their feet, screaming, giving him a standing ovation that shook the walls. One of the greatest entertainers who had ever lived, doing what only he could do. But when Tom found Sammy backstage, he wasn't celebrating. He was sitting alone in a small dressing room, eating off a tray, still in his performance clothes. And when Tom asked why Sammy wasn't heading to the main restaurant with everyone else, the road manager gave him an answer that stopped Tom cold. 3 words. Quiet. Almost embarrassed. He can't go. Tom stared at him. What do you mean he can't go? The road manager looked at the floor. Certain areas of the hotel. They have a policy. Sammy knows. He's used to it. Tom Cruise stood very still. And then something shifted behind his eyes. What Tom did in the next 2 hours didn't just break one rule in one hotel. It forced Las Vegas to look at itself, and what it saw, it could never unsee. Stay with us. This is the story that Vegas never wanted told. White right pointing backhand index. If you believe every person deserves dignity, drop a comment below. Tell us where in the world you're watching this from tonight. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You do not want to miss what happened next. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand who Sammy Davis Jr. was. And what it had cost him to get there. Sammy was born in Harlem, New York, in December 1925. His mother left when he was a toddler. His father and his uncle raised him on the road, pulling him into their vaudeville act before he could read. By the time Sammy was 8 years old, he had already performed in front of thousands of people. He didn't have a childhood. He had a stage. He taught himself to sing, to dance, to play instruments, to do impressions of everyone from Jimmy Cagney to Humphrey Bogart. He wasn't just talented. He was relentless. He practiced until his hands bled. He performed when he was sick, when he was exhausted, when the crowds were small and the pay was nothing. Because the stage was the only place the world made sense to him. By 1989, Sammy Davis Jr. had spent more than 60 years in show business. He was one of the founding members of the Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. He had sold millions of records. He had starred in films, on Broadway, on television. He had performed for presidents. He had performed for royalty. His name meant something. And yet, Las Vegas in the 1950s had been a city of open contradictions, a place where black entertainers could sell out a showroom on Saturday night and be turned away from the front desk of the same hotel on Sunday morning. Where a man could fill a room with 1,200 people who loved him, and then be told he couldn't eat in the restaurant those same people were heading to after the show. Things had changed by 1989. On paper. Officially. The old signs were gone. The old policies had been rewritten. But old habits die slow in desert cities. And Sammy Davis Jr., who had spent his entire career navigating rooms that weren't always sure they wanted him, knew better than most that the rules on paper and the rules in practice were not always the same thing. He had learned, decades ago, to keep quiet. To smile. To perform. To take his money and eat in his dressing room and not cause a scene. Because causing a scene meant losing work. And losing work meant everything fell apart. He had carried that weight for 60 years. And on this night, one of the biggest nights of his career, he was still carrying it. But he didn't know that someone had just found out. And that someone was not the kind of person who looked away. Tom Cruise had been in Las Vegas for 3 days. He was there partly on personal time, partly because he'd been invited to see Sammy perform. A mutual friend had made the introduction 2 years earlier, and Tom had never forgotten the first time he'd watched Sammy work a crowd. He told people afterward that Sammy Davis Jr. was the most naturally gifted performer he had ever seen in his life. That night, watching from the wings, Tom had felt it again. That electricity. That complete, total ownership of a room. Sammy was 63 years old, and he moved across that stage like gravity didn't apply to him. After the show, Tom went backstage. He expected to find champagne. Laughter. The kind of noise that follows a performance like that. Instead, he found Sammy sitting quietly. Tray of food on a small table. The dressing room door half closed. The sounds of the casino, the music, the crowd, the life, coming from somewhere far away. Sammy! Tom knocked on the doorframe. That was something else. You doing anything? A bunch of us are heading to the restaurant. Sammy smiled. The kind of smile a man learns when he's had to use it his whole life. I'm good right here, Tom. You all go ahead. Come on. Come eat with us. I'm fine, son. Really? Tom stood in the doorway for a moment. Something felt wrong. He turned to Sammy's road manager, a man named Philip who had been with Sammy for years. Phil. Why isn't he coming? Philip looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Sammy, then back at Tom. Lowered his voice. It's a policy thing. Certain areas of the property. Management has an understanding with. What kind of understanding? Tom. Sammy's voice was quiet. Steady. The voice of a man who had explained this many times. It's fine. It's an old arrangement. I know where I'm welcome and where I'm not. I've been doing this my whole life. Don't make a thing of it. Tom looked at him. Then at the tray of food. Then at the half-closed door, and the muffled sound of music and laughter coming from a restaurant 100 feet away. You just performed for 1,200 people, Tom said. His voice was very calm. And you can't eat in the restaurant. Sammy didn't answer. Tom turned to Philip. Who do I talk to? Who runs this property tonight? Philip started to say something. But Tom was already walking. And the look on his face told everyone in that hallway that whoever he was going to find, they were about to have a very bad night. White right pointing backhand index. If this story is hitting you the way it hit us, leave a comment. Tell us what you're thinking right now. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Subscribe if you haven't yet. The next part is where everything changes. The hotel manager's name was Richard Calloway. 15 years in Las Vegas hospitality. He had handled difficult guests before. Demanding guests. Famous guests. He thought he had seen everything. He had not seen Tom Cruise walking toward him like this. Tom found him near the front desk and pulled him aside with the kind of directness that left no room for small talk. I need to understand something. Sammy Davis Jr. just performed in your showroom. 1,200 people. Sold out. And he's eating dinner alone in a dressing room because of some policy that says he can't come into the restaurant. Is that right? Calloway straightened. Mr. Cruise, I appreciate your concern, but there are long-standing arrangements with certain. I didn't ask about arrangements. I asked if it's true. A pause. There are preferred seating protocols for. Stop. Tom's voice dropped lower. Quieter. That was somehow worse. I'm going to ask you one more time. Sammy Davis Jr., one of the most famous performers in the history of this country, is he or is he not allowed to eat in this restaurant tonight? Calloway said nothing. Which was its own answer. Tom looked at him for a long moment. You know what I find interesting? You took his performance. You took the ticket sales. You took the prestige of having his name on your marquee. You made money off Sammy Davis Jr. tonight. And then when the show ends, you send him to eat off a tray in a back room like he doesn't exist. Mr. Cruise, this is a complicated situation involving long-term business relationships and... No. It isn't complicated. That's the problem. You're making it complicated so you don't have to say what it actually is. Tom stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You are going to call whoever you need to call. You are going to fix this. Tonight. And Sammy Davis Jr. is going to walk into that restaurant and have dinner like the man he is. Or I am going to walk back to that dressing room, I am going to help him pack his things, and I am going to make sure every person I know in this industry hears the full story of what happened here. That's not a small threat, Calloway said carefully. It's not a threat, Tom said. It's a description of what I'm going to do. You have 20 minutes. Calloway made 3 phone calls. The third one reached the property's senior ownership. The conversation was short. When Calloway came back, his face had changed. Mr. Cruz. Tell Mr. Davis that the restaurant is open to him. Tonight and going forward. We apologize for any. Don't apologize to me, Tom said. I'll be right back. He walked back down the hallway. Knocked on the dressing room door. Sammy was still sitting in the same chair, the food tray still on the table, the noise of the casino still muffled and far away. Sammy! Stand up. We're going to dinner. Sammy looked at him. Studied his face. Tom! What did you do? I had a conversation. Now let's go. I'm hungry. Sammy Davis Jr. sat very still for a moment. And then, slowly, he stood up. And for the first time in 60 years of performing in Las Vegas, he walked toward a door that had always been closed to him. And it was open. They walked side by side down the corridor, Tom Cruise and Sammy Davis Jr., and the people they passed in that hallway stopped and stared. Not because of who Tom was. Because of what was happening. Everyone backstage knew. The stagehands knew. The musicians knew. Philip, Sammy's road manager, who had watched this play out 100 times in 100 cities, stood completely still as they passed, and his eyes were wet. They entered the restaurant. The maître d', who had been personally briefed by Calloway 2 minutes earlier, met them at the entrance. Mr. Davis. Mr. Cruz. Right this way. The room was half full. Couples at dinner. A group of businessmen near the window. Several people who recognized Tom immediately and began to whisper. And then they recognized who was walking beside him, and the whispering changed. Tom chose a table near the center of the room. Not hidden in a corner. Not tucked away. Center of the room, where everyone could see. They sat down. A waiter arrived with menus. Sammy opened his and looked at it for a moment without speaking. Tom said, "What are you having?" Sammy looked up. His eyes were steady, but something behind them was not. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I've never ordered in here before." Tom didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Order whatever you want. All of it if you feel like it." They ate. They talked. About music, about performances they'd both seen, about the business, about the desert, about nothing important. The waiters served them without incident. The other guests, after the initial stares, returned to their own dinners. The world did not end. Nothing caught fire. The evening moved the way evenings are supposed to move, quietly and without incident, 2 people sharing a meal and a conversation in a room full of other people doing the same. When they were done, they walked out together. Through the restaurant, through the lobby, out into the warm Vegas night. Sammy stopped just outside the door. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Just stood there with the neon lights reflecting off the pavement and the sound of the strip moving all around them. Then, "You know how many times I've walked past that restaurant? In this hotel. In every hotel. You know how many times I've just kept walking?" Tom said nothing. "Nobody ever stopped before," Sammy said. "Nobody ever just stopped and said no, this isn't right, we're fixing this tonight." Tom looked at him. "Someone should have stopped a long time ago." Sammy's voice was quiet when he answered. "Yes. They should have." That night changed something. Not just in one hotel. Not just in one city. Something shifted in the way Las Vegas understood the value of the people it had been built on. And it started with 2 men standing on a sidewalk in the desert, one of them finally through a door that should never have been closed. White right pointing backhand index, this moment deserves to be remembered. If it moved you, share this video. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from tonight. And subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story, because what happened next is the part that never gets told. By the following morning, the story had moved through the entertainment community the way stories move in a town built on whispers and favors. Tom Cruise had walked Sammy Davis Jr. into a Las Vegas restaurant that had informally kept him out for years. He had confronted hotel management directly, used his leverage without hesitation, and made it clear that the arrangement, whatever polite name they'd been using for it, was finished. Other headliners heard. Managers heard. Agents heard. The conversation that followed wasn't primarily moral, though the moral dimension was impossible to ignore. It was practical. It was economic. If Tom Cruise, one of the biggest movie stars on earth, was willing to pull his endorsement, his presence, and his influence from a property over this, the math was suddenly very clear. Within weeks, the informal restrictions at several strip properties had been quietly removed. Not announced. Not celebrated. Just gone. The way things that never should have existed tend to disappear when the cost of keeping them finally exceeds the cost of letting them go. Tom never made a public statement. Never held a press conference. Never made himself the story. When people asked him about it later, he deflected. "I just had a conversation," he'd say. Sammy Davis Jr. deserved to eat dinner. That's not complicated. But it was complicated. It had been complicated for 60 years. It just didn't have to stay that way. And Sammy Davis Jr., who had spent 6 decades building a career in a country that kept moving the lines on him, finally had something that no performance, no record, no standing ovation had ever given him. He had a seat at a table that used to tell him no. And nobody was taking it back. Sammy Davis Jr. died on May 16, 1990. Less than a year after that dinner. He was 64 years old. Throat cancer. He had kept performing almost until the very end, because that was who he was. The stage was where he breathed. At his funeral, Frank Sinatra spoke. He said that Sammy Davis Jr. was the greatest entertainer he had ever known. And that the talent was extraordinary, but what was more extraordinary was the grace. The fact that Sammy had carried everything he carried for as long as he did, and had never once let it make him hard. Never let it make him cruel. Never let it steal the joy out of what he did. Tom Cruise did not speak publicly about that night in Las Vegas for many years. But people who were there, the stagehands, the musicians, Philip the road manager, they carried the story with them. The way people carry things that matter. Because what happened that night wasn't complicated. A young man with power decided to use it. A door that had been closed opened. A man who had earned his place 1,000 times over finally walked through it. That's the whole story. That's all it ever was. Tom Cruise discovered that Sammy Davis Jr. was banned from a space he had helped build. He didn't look away. He didn't say it wasn't his problem. He walked down that hallway and he said, "This ends tonight." And because he had the power to mean it, it did. That is the difference between having power and using it. White right pointing backhand index. If this story stayed with you, share it. Someone needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us what you took from this. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. These voices deserve to be remembered.